It's Tuesday, July 29th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on this show, Trump's new trade deal deadline is in just 3 days. And wouldn't you know it, but it looks like most of the world is calling his bluff. Now, I'll talk about that, plus two big deals that were at least made with handshakes in the last week that already seem to be falling apart, while there's more data showing that the costs for us, the U.S. consumer, are going up. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to Make It Make Sense on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new content going up each week. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. You can tag me. I'm at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get on with the show. We are heading into the final stretch of summer, and let's face it, you need some new sunglasses. Your old ones are scraped or scuffed, or maybe you sat on them because you left them in the car like I do. At any rate, it is time to replace them so you can finish out the summer in style. That's where Akila comes in. Independently designed and handcrafted in LA, they offer timeless style and uncompromising quality without the inflated price tag. And all their styles are unisex and frankly look great. I really like their Essential line. It's a cool throwback look that really fits my day-to-day wear. I can throw them on and I know that they'll fit my fit. And you can feel good about wearing them all the time, whether it's the UV blocking sunglasses, the blue light clear lens glasses, or the prescription eyewear. They're all made from 50% recycled materials, including recycled lenses, eco-friendly plant-based plastics, and sustainable plastic-free biodegradable packaging. That is a lot. Plus, all Akila frames come back with a 1-year warranty. In case anything should happen to them, you just ship them back and they'll fix them or replace them. So right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off your next pair of Akila glasses, their highest discount of the summer, when you use the code MIMS25, that's MIMS25, on your entire purchase. Make It Make Sense also gets a cut of that, but, it's just another reason to go check them out. Protect your eyes, support the show. It's a win-win for everybody. You get it. Anyway, that is MIMS25, MIMS25 at checkout. Discover Akila, unisex, handmade sunglasses from LA, independent style meets unbeatable prices. Elevate your look with modern eyewear concepts. All right, let's get to the show. So Donald Trump is in Scotland this week. Actually, he's on a plane back right now. He's there to open a new Trump golf course, which is something that I wrote about last week on the Make It Make Sense Substack, that Trump has spent an equivalent of every other day at one of his own properties during this presidency so far, which during his first term meant overcharging staff and Secret Service members for their stays at his own resorts, which funneled a lot of taxpayer money into his own pockets. But that's not what this episode is about. You can go ahead and read that on the Substack. What this episode is about is that we still don't have the trade deals that Trump has promised. Friday is the president's deadline for when he was going to send out nearly 200 letters over the course of the last month announcing deals to countries around the world. And he moved that from an earlier hard deadline when the tariffs were supposed to go into effect. But so far, he's only sent out about 25 sternly worded letters with U.S. demands about tariffs and trade deals. And so far, he hasn't sent out the other 166 letters. Now, could he do that in 3 days? Maybe, if they've got people licking stamps around the clock, but I don't know. And of the 90 trade deals that the Trump administration said it was going to make back in March in 90 days, just 3 have been made so far. One with the UK, one with Vietnam, and the Philippines. And now, yes, the White House has been meeting with China, which is the big deal, and has, in its words, inked an initial trade deal, but that agreement is really more of an agreement to keep having talks about agreeing. And it's a long way off from a deal. Even today, after 2 full days of talks, China and the U.S. only agreed to have more talks. And then there were the 2 big deals last week and then Monday. So last week, Trump struck an agreement with Japan, sort of, which he boasted about at a Republican reception last week.
Signed the largest trade deal in history, I think maybe the largest deal in history, with Japan. And that was done with Japan. They had their top people here, and we worked on it long and hard, and it's a great deal for everybody. I always say it has to be great for everybody. It's a great deal. A lot different from the deals in the past, I can tell you that.
So, according to the White House, the Japan deal is a $550 million investment from Japan in exchange for 15% tariffs on Japanese goods that come into the U.S., which is lower than the 25% that Trump had threatened. Now, that $55 million number will be for things like cars, rice, certain other ag products from the U.S. to Japan, and then the U.S. will keep 90% of the profits from the tariffs. And the White House is promising to use that money to fund things like domestic industries like automakers or semiconductor chip factories or pharmaceuticals. And it sounds like a really good deal, except it's already falling apart. You see, Japanese leaders are saying that the White House is, at best, misleading people about the deal they actually made. So, of all the profits the U.S. could take in on those tariffs, that 90% number, well, it would be, quote, based on the degree of contribution and risk taken by each party, according to reporting first done by the Financial Times that cited a slideshow that was prepared by the Japanese government about this deal, meaning the U.S. would have to make deals with individual Japanese companies or importers on every industry import. It is not a blanket 90%. And then that $550 million, well, that's not even a set number either, because while the White House is saying it's a historic number, Japan's negotiator said that number was an upper limit and not a, quote, target or commitment. So essentially, the deal the White House and Trump said was massive is maybe not even a real deal, or at the very least, is the White House overpromising with the big potential to underdeliver. And then what we learned about the deal from officials who spoke to the Financial Times is the terms of whatever you want to call this agreement seem so hastily put together and misunderstood is because they are and were. This agreement between two multi-trillion-dollar economies that impact more than 500 million lives just within their own borders was worked out between Trump and Japan's lead negotiator in an hour and 10 minutes. That's shorter than most Pixar movies. And to top it all off, because negotiations were so short, Japanese officials told the Times, quote, there was no written agreement with Washington and no legally binding one would be drawn up. So there's nothing even on paper with Japan. So to call it a real deal feels like a stretch. And that brings us then to the deal that Trump struck yesterday with the European Union. This was one a lot of the world was watching, not just because collectively it involved the most countries and the two largest economies in the world, but because the EU had initially put up a strong front about retaliating against Trump's 30% tariff promise. Instead, the EU Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen met with Trump while he was in Scotland to come to an agreement about what the U.S. and the EU were going to do. The White House put out a statement saying the EU will be investing $1.3 trillion in U.S. industries, including $750 million in buying U.S. oil and gas, and another $600 billion invested in other U.S. industries by 2028. They also said companies bringing into the U.S. from Europe things like cars, car parts, prescription drugs, and microchips will have to pay 15% tariffs on those, which is half of what Trump was threatening. But imported European steel and aluminum would still have a 50% tariff in place starting Friday. Here's Trump talking about that.
The August 1st is there for everyone. The deals all start on August 1st. Most of the deals, other than steel and aluminum, which we've been getting 50% tariffs from, I guess, just about everybody, and those have come in, and we've taken in, hundreds of billions of dollars just on steel and aluminum. You've seen the numbers. We had a tremendous amount of money come in over the last month, and it's coming in, very rapidly, which is fair.
Except pretty much everything he just said and everything I just laid out before this in the deal isn't the case, according to the EU. According to the European Commission, which is the governing body for the EU, officials there held a press conference, and said that there would be no new tariffs on prescription drugs starting Friday, while the White House said the EU will invest in American companies and will buy American energy. The EU Commission said they're only pledges of intentions which are not legally binding. The White House said the EU promised to buy a significant amount of U.S. military equipment. The EU says that's not true. It was just Trump's impression. And Trump says the EU will, quote, streamline food safety to import more U.S. pork and dairy. The EU says, quote, we have made no concessions on food safety and our right to regulate. And then the big one for Trump, the one that he campaigned on that helped him win the state of Pennsylvania and the White House, was those steep 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. Yeah, the EU says those aren't a thing either. They only kick in after a certain amount of steel or aluminum is imported, and the US and EU haven't even agreed to what that amount is yet. So just like Japan, a lot of this isn't on paper and isn't legally binding. So at the most, it's a handshake deal where the president is under the impression that he came out on top. Here's how the EU commissioner described it.
And indeed, it is about rebalancing. So you can call it fairness, you can call it rebalancing. We have a surplus, the United States has a deficit, and we have to rebalance it. You have an excellent trade relation. It's a huge volume of trade that we have together. So we will make it more sustainable.
And that word sustainable, that's a really important one here. The EU, like I said before, was putting up a really strong front, pushing back pretty hard against Trump's threats of a trade war. But like they have been here in the U.S., European stocks have been thrown way out of whack because Trump's trade policies have been so chaotic. So the EU decided to do whatever this deal agreement thing is to calm things down. And maybe you can say that that was art of the deal for Trump or that this was always a plan he had in mind. But the question is, what happens when the EU and Japan don't do what the White House says they've agreed to do because there's no actual agreement to look back on? And that brings us to the final piece of this episode, is that while all of the tariff and trade talks have been going on, prices here at home have been rising. Because remember, tariffs are taxes that companies pay to import things that they need to the U.S., and then those costs are then passed on to us, the people who buy those things. And we've seen that over the last several months. According to the Independent Institute, which is a right-wing think tank, the cost of international goods, so we are talking often things like alcohol, textiles, like clothes, leather goods, rare minerals, those have gone way up, but so have domestic products. And every time over the last few months that Trump has announced a shift in trade talks, prices have jumped. And to be clear, there is one thing the tariffs have really done, and that is netted a lot of money for the U.S. Treasury, which is what Trump wanted. That was a goal and a promise he set and made. According to the Treasury Department, the U.S. brought in $27.2 billion so far this year, a 300% increase from last year. Now, Trump originally said he wanted to use that money to eliminate the income tax or pay down the U.S. debt. Now, mind you, federal income tax brings in about $3 trillion a year to the federal government, and that funds everything from the military to public safety to Medicaid, Medicare to Social Security to schools, roads. You get it. And the national debt is $36 trillion, and it's going up by about $2 million a minute. So $27 billion, or even at the highest projections from places like the Bipartisan Policy Center, which thinks that tariffs could raise somewhere around $127 billion, that number doesn't even come close to making a dent in the debt or filling in the gap left behind by getting rid of income taxes. Instead, Trump has floated the idea of using this tariff money to give Americans what he's calling rebate checks. It's the same thing he did during COVID when Congress doled out relief money and then let him put his name on it, even though it was Congress who actually passed that. Now, this new tariff rebate, as Trump calls it, already has a supporter, and that's Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, who on Monday introduced the American Workers Rebate Act. It would send rebate checks worth $600 a person or $2,400 to a family of four out to Americans. It's the exact same amount that economists say is being lost per household because of the tariffs. And so far, This new bill hasn't gotten a lot of support in the Senate, although that could change the harder Trump pushes for it. The irony here is that's our money. They wouldn't have to pay us back in a rebate if the tariffs weren't in place, meaning the U.S. isn't really getting a better deal overall. We're just paying more up front and then crossing our fingers we'll be made whole on the back end. And the real winner here, that means, is Donald Trump, because his poll numbers tanked last week to the lowest in presidential history at this time, second only to his own first-term numbers. And when he sent out COVID checks last time with his name on them, his numbers went up, and the idea of floating money from the government directly into your bank account will only increase your approval rating. But that seems to be the entire approach with the economy right now from the White House, making big sweeping statements and promises where Trump gets to be the hero and then leaving us, the U.S. voters and consumers, hollow. And it's hard to tell just how long that can hold out before something breaks or before we hit a deadline that people don't care about. So the thing to watch this week is that Friday, August 1st deadline for these trade letters or maybe some new trade deals that might come out of nowhere in the next 72 hours. If Trump blows through another deadline, what does that mean for us? And I think that's the biggest question a lot of people are asking right now. All right, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month to get access to bonus content every single week. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. It's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.